We are going to actually talk about question 10 today. So we're doing this in a Zoom format, which is new for Karen and I. But what I'm going to do is read question 10 to all of you, but the question will be below. So as we discuss it, you have something to refer back to. I suggest that once I read the question, you pause the video so you can choose your correct answer, and then we'll discuss it after that. Does that sound good? All right. So you ready, Karen?
I'm ready.
Okay, so question 10. An ABG sample obtained while a patient is on BiPAP at 80% and a PEEP of 5 reveals the following. Here we see a pH of 7.21, CO2 of 74, PO2 of 81, and a bicarb of 26. So you have 4 options, so this would be the time to pause the video and choose your answer. And then now Karen's going to discuss first what the right answer is, and then also discuss like why the other 3 are not correct. So take it away, Karen.
Great, Shannon. Thanks a lot. So we're looking at this, the answer here is respiratory acidosis with severe hypoxemia.
Okay.
So yes, it's B. When you're approaching this, whenever you have an ABG, you're going to want to look at your oxygenation and you're going to want to look at your acid-base balance. I like to look at them separate and then see how they interplay and see how they might help me in the clinical setting to determine what's going on with the patient by looking at both of those components. So let's start with oxygenation first. That's where I like to start. So what we have here is we have a patient who has a PaO2 of 81. But they are on 80% FiO2, and they even have some PEEP on, which helps with oxygenation. So we have to normalize that for how much oxygen they're on, and there's something called a PF ratio that's going to help us do that. So we're going to take the PaO2, and we're going to divide it by the FiO2. And the FiO2 is always going to be a fraction, so we're going to use a decimal. So in this situation, the patient would be on 80%, that would be 0.80 or 0.8. But let's just talk about what it would look like in a normal person. If you and I, Shanna, they did an ABG on you, you might have a PaO2 of 81. And normal is between 80 and 100, and you're breathing room air. So Shanna, if you have your calculator out or your phone, why don't you take the 81 and divide it by the room air, which is going to be 21% or decimal to 1. Okay, what do you get?
I get 385.
Okay. So she gets a PF ratio of 385. Anything over 380, and some books will say 400, but 380 is a good cutoff, is considered a normal PF ratio. Okay. So that means you do not have hypoxemia. You are fine. Yay, it's good. So now let's go back to our patient. And we have a PaO2 of 81, but now they're on 80%. So we're going to divide it by 0.8.
101.
Okay, so that is considered a pretty low PF ratio. So in the definition, just as an example, in the definition of ARDS, anything under 100 or less is considered severe ARDS. So that would be a really bad oxygenation status. So we can say, oh, this patient has severe hypoxemia. So we already know one thing. We haven't even done the acid base yet, and we already know that it can only be B or D because those both say severe hypoxemia in them. The other two say mild. So we know we have a patient who's got a lot of oxygenation issues. So another thing just to note on PF ratio is that it's considered most accurate when a patient is on a PEEP of 5 and either on a ventilator or on BiPAP. Okay. If they're just like on nasal prongs or something, you could still use it as an indicator of how their oxygenation status is, but it's not quite as accurate. So better when they're on BiPAP or a ventilator.
Okay, sounds good. So now that we know that there's severe hypoxemia, what's the second step?
Okay, good. So now we want to look at their acid-base balance and determine what's going on there. Now, most people, they want to go right to the pH. So I like to say, don't do that. Go to your parameters. You have two parameters. The first one is CO2, or PCO2, and the normal for that is 35 to 45. So now we look at our patient's CO2 here. It's 74. And 74 is high, okay? They're retaining CO2. Always think of CO2 as an acid. So if you have too much CO2, you have too much acid. So once I determine that that parameter, that respiratory parameter is abnormal, I put a big A next to that, okay, as acid. Now we're going to look at bicarb. And bicarb is in the normal range. 26 is a normal range of bicarb. And so I'm going to put an N next to that. So there's bicarb's normal. Now I get to look at the pH. Normal pH, 7.35 to 7.45. And so this pH is low, which makes the patient acidotic. So this 7.21. So this patient has an acidosis. So now I get to put an A next to that, and I get to line up the A's. And so I have a respiratory acidosis. That's my primary acid-base imbalance.
Perfect. So we got respiratory acidosis with severe hypoxemia.
Correct.
Quick question, though, on understanding partial compensation, because I know that in D it's an option. Maybe you have some tips on how someone can even approach an ABG to determine if there's any kind of compensation, either partial or full.
Okay, great. That's a great question. So whenever I'm thinking about compensation, remember that the kidneys compensate for respiratory problems and the lungs compensate for metabolic problems. So that's what you want to always consider. So when I look at the two parameters, which is the first thing I always do, if any of the parameters are normal, then there's really no compensation going on there.
Okay.
Also, another important thing is if the pH is in normal range, like 7.35 to 7.45, but both of the parameters are abnormal, then you probably have compensation going on.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because the body never overcompensates. So it won't go to the other extreme. So it never overcompensates. So whenever I'm doing acid-base balance on a patient, I always consider the only normal pH to be 7.40. So when I'm looking for compensation, it could still be in the range. But if it's leaning towards acid, then I know it's got an acidosis with metabolic compensation. Whereas,
Yeah, I think that'll help a lot, because I know that's the part that I used to always kind of get confused on. I'll have coworkers also will look at ABGs and trying to determine, okay, what kind of partial compensation, or if full compensation has occurred or not. So I think that's great. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I think that helps a lot, and I think discussing ABGs is especially relevant to the exam. So I hope everyone understood what we were discussing, and if you have any questions, leave comments below or send us an email, and we will see you next time. Okay, bye.